Who wrote this stuff? Virality, isolation, deepening divides. Pavel, was that you? You had a bad day at that time? Martin, was your lover left? No, don't go into that. I mean, it is just very negative. It's not working. Here we go. This is from our conference program. Bad thing, bad thing, bad thing, bad thing. Oh, you wouldn't want to be alive in 2023, would you? It's getting worse. Everything's getting worse. I want to question that. I'm going to question that in several trivial ways. I'm sorry, speakers who think they're funny. And then I'm going to question that with respect to translation and interpreting. And I'm going to suggest that facing these things, we should not succumb to, I don't know, is it Slavic despondency? It's cool to see bad and complain? Or is it a cultural studies discourse where the bigger the enemy, the better your challenge to it, and there's no good to be found anywhere? Or what? I want to suggest the response is to go and find out, interact with data. Not that truth springs from data directly or anything like that. It's just that we can moderate and refine our idea of where we are in the world and figure out how to act. Action without data, without a modicum of empiricism, is not going to lead very far. I will now go on and, if I can, Martin, can you? Exclusion. Exclusion happens to me on Spanish television. There's never any weather in Portugal. But these days, you can, just go online to any map or click over the channel or get Portuguese television and find out. I mean, we have democratic, electronic means to overcome state exclusion, state nationalism. This is not working. Should I stand over here to something? This is a series on Netflix. Don't watch it, it's a piece of crap. But it's set in Barcelona, it's subsidized by the city of Barcelona and Catalonia. But, can you see that? Audio languages are English, Europe, Spanish, Ukrainian. Okay. Catalan, Basque, Galician, official languages of Spain. We have language policy applied to select the languages that are available. We have a new co-official language in Spain, Ukrainian. Okay, that's fine. I understand the politics behind that. But there is also exclusion there. Any action to favor one group implies a certain action to disfavor others and not expend it. Wars are harrowing experiences when they're close to you. Yes, agreed. But wars go on all the time. I'm sorry to count deaths, but there are websites that count deaths and you can go and find it. The situation in Ukraine at the bottom is terrible. But the other wars are very recent and many of them are ongoing, with massive numbers of displaced people, notably in Africa. And these are the people that come into Spain in greater numbers than the Ukrainians. So where are their languages? Not to be found. There is a systematic application of policy which privileges some and therefore excludes others. And it's not hard to find those numbers, but they're not going to appear on that television news that also excludes weather in Portugal. Believe it or not, we're getting better at war. I shouldn't say that. The number of wars in the world is constant, but the number of deaths is going down radically. Okay, unprecedented, the worst time. These are the things I just heard in our introductory speech. Well, no, go and look at the numbers, and the number of deaths in war is going down. The type of wars is changing. The number of wars is going up, but they're small, civil-based wars with foreign intervention. Okay, they're not the big state-to-state wars that characterize the 20th century. A little bit of empiricism can help relativize our current state of despair. Other thing, this is an introductory. This is Australian research. The DNA that I have and you have can be compared with the DNA of other mammals and other species. And they calculate the time clock, the average lifespan written into the DNA that I and you have. It is 38 years. This body was supposed to die at 38. I'm going to just about double it. Medical science and lifestyle change is doubling our lifespan beyond what it should be, okay? And this is great progress. There's no reason for, well, yes, there is, because old age care is a huge problem. As we know, we have to restructure our entire societies to account for it. But, you know, what would you rather die at 38? Okay, some of you are very young, but believe me, most of us are over 38. Okay, there is progress. Even things like the enormous disparity between the rich and the poor, the top 10% in the world and the top 10 or 20% at the bottom. Even that inequality in income distribution and wealth distribution, you've got it here over 2 centuries, okay? It was always bad. It was always bad, always, from 1820, okay? It got worse during the imperialist age of the 19th century. Colonialism didn't help it. It came down, and look, the last 20 years, there is relative convergence between rich and poor. This is news that you're not going to get in cultural studies, ladies and gentlemen. Cornelia is worried about this as well, because something is getting better. What the hell could be getting better in the world? You really have to go and look around to find it. This was my summer reading, actually. What are the causes of convergence, or the reduction in income disparity in the world? Firstly, the rise of Asian economies. That's obvious, okay? And the second, given by Piketty here in this book, is the international distribution of knowledge. The fact, primarily, that the Western university system has spread all over the world, that knowledge is distributed far more than it was, that we have many countries contributing to scientific knowledge, doing research, that the top universities in the world are no longer exclusively in the United States and in Europe, implies that there is an effect on convergence. Some things are getting better, and we are very intimately involved in that improvement. So please, just engage with a few numbers. Are they true? No. They're all gathered from certain places and selected and fabricated to present an opinion, but you have to engage with it and get other numbers if you want to disprove them. Okay, you have to have something there. Gender divide in pay is getting better. It's bad, but it's getting better. Even men support Me Too. So in the societies I live in, the range of sexualities are now supported, at least in word, if not in all other aspects. The societies I live in, gay marriage is legal. Euthanasia is legal in most of the societies I live in. Most of my youth was spent hiding the weed and criticizing the hypocrisy of the state. It's legal. I think even, I walked past a marijuana shop yesterday in Slovakia, down here, down the road. So correct the PowerPoint. Yeah? Teeth are getting better. Watch Austin Powers. The meme of the 1960s is everybody had bad teeth. You've got lovely smiling teeth here. Yeah? What have the Romans ever done for us? In addition to all that, the labor movement has, in the past century and more, given us significant improvement in lifestyle. Okay? There is, I think, no need for axiomatic despair in this particular point in time. Many things have gotten better over the centuries. Now, isolation. This is where I am from. Can you see? That's Perth. The Indian Ocean on one side, desert on the other. And you reckon you're isolated. I'll tell you isolation. In the 1970s, I would go to the university library, look at the journals, look for conferences, and tried to apply to send an abstract. By the time I sent the abstract, the deadline had passed. Yeah? It was, yeah. Flights were expensive. They took a long time. It was hell. It's now a very nice place to live. You're welcome to come there. We have internet even. Yeah? Do you remember Tipex? Old people here, like me, will remember. How hard was it to produce a translation on a typewriter? Tipex, for the young guys, you used to have to paint. It was liquid paper to paint over your mistake, and then you had to type the error on top of it, okay? The general availability of information, what we call the internet, has become such a boon to the translation process. When I first started as a professional translator, not in Perth, in Barcelona, I was translating a big project on the grey economy, okay? Illegal, undeclared economy. And I needed the terms in English for it. And at the time, there was no internet. I had to go to the European Information Office and go through printed documents to find something on this topic to see what the official terms were. It was physically hard. And I was doing this one day. I just remember going through, and then I find the perfect article. It's a report on the grey economy in Spain, in English. So I've got the Spanish there. I can read it and see what's going on. And I'm going through it. Hey, it's well-written English. You know, I trust this translator. Wait a minute, this is really well-written English. And it dawned on me that I was reading myself. This was a translation I had done the previous year. That is, you're on the front line. There was no immediate authority you could access. Information was very difficult to get to. Do not tell me that translators, interpreters, you really want to go back and not have the internet? Okay. It's easier to produce text, distribute text. I had to go to the publisher physically and deliver the translation, which was nice because I got a free lunch and I would meet people personally. But it's so much easier now. It doesn't matter where I live in the world. I can do my translations, deliver them, and do it on time. Less than 1% of the words translated in the world are done by professionals. This is my calculation, and I think it's much less. What does that mean? Translation has become democratized. It's something everybody can do well or badly according to their needs, and they have access to it. It means we have to do research on the social role of translation and not merely on protecting a profession, which is still there. I liken it to operas. There are opera singers, but everybody can sing in the bath. And who's going to stop them? Okay, they're going to have a good time, and we can look at that and discuss music and the social role of music. Do the same with translation. Electronic distribution of knowledge, of translations, also makes state control harder. Censorship still exists. In some countries, it's much stronger than in others, but it is harder to do, okay? There is greater democratization and greater freedom because of the electronic communication we have. I hope in the sessions people are going to disagree with me and discuss these things, but What is empiricism? Every statement you make, like those ones we began with, every statement should become a question. And a research question must be something to which we don't really know the answer. If you think you already know the answer, then you're presenting an argument. That's great, because I like debating, but research shouldn't be an argument. It should start from a question to which you don't know the answer and you want to find out. And one way to do that is to just ask yourself, could the opposite be true? And that's exactly what I've just done. For the original statements there, I said, well, yeah, I can understand that, but could the opposite be true? And let's find some numbers. Or let's find some qualitative information. All right? This was Gideon Turi's trick. Gideon Turi started as the enfant terrible of translation studies by just reversing everything. Could the opposite be true? Oh, let's start from the target side, because everybody else starts from the source. Yeah. And so on. It's a good trick. It'll make you think. And then you go out and you find data that can support or refute, and that data obviously goes back and refines your hypotheses, and this is classic science. Empiricism does not imply just quantities, it's also qualities. Empiricism does not imply that any truth springs directly from data. In fact, quite the opposite. We need a lot more conceptualization, a lot more refinement in our theorization before and during the interaction with data. Please don't accuse me of positivism. The defense of empiricism is simply a critique of gratuitous theorizing that never tests itself in any serious way. We accept these days in just about every science I know, for example, that the observer is always part of the act of observation. All right, that implies a degree of reflexivity as well. Those are very basics. I'm going to present a bit of a few numbers, just a few numbers. It's not truth, it's not falsehood, just a few numbers concerning AI, which is what people seem to be worried about. What do? Test what it can do, put it in some kind of context. I'm looking at the history of automation and see what you can do. Basically, for many of us, that concerns training. Translators, though, can also choose how to act. I'm not asking these other questions that are interesting questions to ask, but they're harder to assess on the basis of data. Okay, you need a more sophisticated kind of empiricism to address them. Especially, can we catch students cheating? That's for another conference in itself, okay? Now, there was a debate in Barcelona especially about Squid Game. Remember Squid Game, anybody? Anyway, the subtitlers, audiovisual translators, were up in arms against Netflix using machine translation and post-editing for that. There was a huge campaign which was quite successful in various media. And I actually went in detail. This is the head of the Audiovisual Translators Association of Catalonia, oh no, of Spain actually, I think. And she was explaining their cause. And I went through it in detail. I said, what the hell are you talking about? And then it occurred to me that every time she said post-editing, she really meant raw machine translation. That there was no conceptual difference in the discourse of complaint between what machine translation can do and what the actual output is after a good post-editor has been through it. That is, people can be trained to do good post-editing, I hope. But conceptually, it was just all mixed up. And these days it's getting further mixed up because we're mixing large language models into the discourse on machine translation. Whereas we need some conceptual refinement and a few clear terms just to know what we're talking about. AI, GPT, the one that we're using, or Bard, some of us use as well, is great. It can do many, many things. I'm enjoying exploring with it. What does it do? Does it marginalize languages? Absolutely. Here are some numbers. You won't see them, but it's comparing GPT with, I think, Google Translate, no, Google Translate, sorry, because DeepL doesn't do these languages, for German at the bottom, but you've got Icelandic and Hausa. Icelandic and Hausa, forget about it, okay? Forget about it. That the technologies are privileging some big languages and so far not doing much for the long tail of languages. We did it in our own research group in Tarragona. For Armenian, just rubbish. Neural works more or less, but GPT, no way. The people at Dublin City University have done research that includes Irish and find that it's much worse for Irish. So you can get the numbers and say, well, yeah, it does these great things, but it's privileging some languages and thereby excluding many others. These are the languages on the internet. English dominates. You can't see what number 2 language is, can you? Russian. Think about it. Anyway. News report, news flash, Politico. Sorry, I've put this in other talks and I've put it on Twitter and whatever. Look, who killed EU's translators? Where's the EU translators? Who killed you? And it says underneath there, automation is creeping in. Oh, watch out for automation, okay? And translators are among its first victims. Help, and that's the translator there being stuck in. And look at that decline in numbers. How terrible. If you go into the data, which is freely available online, not in this article, but in the online data, you find that what's happened is the number of in-house translators has gone down and the number of external freelancers has gone up. And that the EU budget for translation has gone up, all right? And that they're not using technology very well because the price of a translation per page has also gone up on about a par with inflation. Okay, it used to be much higher prior to that, all right? So the news article is just absolute rubbish. It can be falsified very easily with a few clicks into the data, which you can analyze for yourselves. This is a study about job destruction from Google Translate and ChatGPT. It's based on, they call it a large online labor market. Must be pros, because that's the only one that fits the bill. Carried out in this period, which is when Google Translate went neural, so there was a qualitative jump in this period, and they're assessing the effects of that jump on employment, and they found that the demand for regular translations declined. Therefore, technological improvement destroys jobs for translators, right? Ooh, look a bit further. What they call transcreations was not affected at all. That is translation plus, okay, if you like. And there was no significant change in the rate of pay. How can that be? I find another study on job advertisements covering the same period, a bit longer though, and they find neural did not lead to decreases in demand. How can that be? Okay, and yet they found an increase for transversal skills, transcreation. Now that makes sense. And if you go into the numbers, you will find, I mean, you have to interpret numbers, okay? It's not, truth doesn't leap out at you. But when Google went neural, employers said, yeah, I'll try that, and then went back to their translators. That what you got in that 1 year period is not reflected in the 5 year period. One explanation could be that the language service providers tried the raw MT, found it didn't work, had to go back to their translators, or got translators to do lots of post-editing. This is a study. Translators and interpreters are never on top in anything. This one, we're on top, okay? We come out first in professions that are exposed to automation, basically GPT, all right? Interpreters and translators, and we're in the middle on the second one, okay? Note, though, that in this study, exposure does not mean job destruction. It just means labor augmenting or labor displacing. You don't lose your job, you just do different things on the job, and that is what displacement means, okay? And what's interesting is that they're working from ONET data, which is an American base on just under 1,000 occupations, so it's interesting to compare across occupations, but it gives no data on quality, no data on pay, so it's very poor in terms of employment conditions. Still, you know, we can look at that, say yes, but it doesn't mean job destruction. Everybody says, I say it when I teach these technologies, never upload a confidential text. Never upload to an online translation memory or machine translation system or anything, because they will steal the data, right? I teach this. So I say, well, how can I check? Could the opposite be true? I went looking for court cases where companies have been sued for breach of contract or breach of confidentiality because of online translation services. And I really did a search from the beginning of the 1990s because it concerned translation memories back in the day. Nothing. There's lots of interesting court cases about translators stealing the other translators' work, and a company called TransPerfect, which went through an interesting divorce case. So if you want to go through it, I mean, divorce like the boss was being divorced by his, anyway. Interesting stuff to do research on, but I have found no proof of any breach of confidentiality through online translation systems. Sorry? Yes, please. Prove me wrong, please.
I don't know if I can do that, but I can say that ordinary people don't have the money or the time to sue big companies, so there might not be court cases for that reason also.
Yep. That's great. You're engaging with empirical data. You're thinking about where does it come from, what does it mean, how can I get around it? That's exactly what I need. So let's look for X tweets about this. Does automation change the way we work? Now, the research on this says pretty uniformly yes. And this is a study, this is the same study, I think, from Sheila Castillo in Dublin City University. It's an example. Do I have time for an example? We'll see. It's a classical problem. English. And I'm honored to meet you, the future leaders of Great Britain and the world. This is Michelle Obama, female, addressing a bunch of students, male and female, female and male. Okay, now the problem is you go into Portuguese and by default, Michelle Obama becomes masculine, honrado, and as futuras leaders, they become feminine. So a classical problem, and you say, oh, this is where machine translation is rubbish and GPT can't do any better. And I must admit, in our research, GPT is not better than DeepL, certainly, and about on a par with Google Translate, depending on the languages. So for our community, this is not a significant revolution on the level of translation as translation, okay? So, yeah. Now, I did this actually into Catalan, without gendered adjectives, I said, and it didn't do any good. And then I said, avoid sexism, and it didn't do any good, all right? It didn't fix it up. But then I said, well, it's Michelle Obama, and she's addressing young men and women. And then it did. En centro honrada is feminine. So if you give the right instructions, it does the right translation, okay? And then it even invented a term in Catalan, líders y las futuras líderes y els futurs líders. So it did both, okay? So, you know, you tell it to do it, it'll do it. That's not a problem. Except it's laborious if you have to give those long instructions. Is that going to work? It's not going to work. Oh, look, okay. That was a really cool video of me translating on DeepL, all right, where you click on the offending term. So honrado was, and I click it and I get honrada, and I select it and I've changed that problem, okay? And then on the other side, instead of the future leaders, I put who will lead. I just converted the noun into a verb, and the translation is fixed. These interactive machine translation systems are wonderfully creative. I've just done a whole book into French doing that. French is not my strong language. I really need that. But going through DeepL and playing in that sandpit and using the alternatives that it gives is a tremendously creative process. And I think that's got to be the future of our interaction with the technologies. Interactive machine translation, interactive GPT, will improve our performance a lot and is a very profoundly creative process. It's augmented translation as advanced by the audio-visual translators there. I think some of us have been talking about it for a long time, but an excellent article by Sharon O'Brien states the case. This came out a month or so ago, that we should not get hung up on this opposition between the human and the machine, that the reality for a long time, forever, has been that humans work with technology, and this is just another technology that we have to learn to work with. Even the Tipex and the typewriter, that was technology. I'm concluding. Is that okay? Do you need more? No.
We'll have some time for discussion.
Good. I'd like to have a discussion, so I'll wrap up here. The opposite of that, of interacting with data, of testing out your ideas on data, of developing new ideas from what that interaction can do, the opposite of that kind of reflexive dialectic empiricism, if I could give it a name, is, in our own discipline, the formation of echo chambers, the very thing that people were lamenting in our instructions for this conference. We have whole sections of translation studies that circulate their own certainties without breaking out of that echo chamber. I'm probably in the empiricist echo chamber at the moment, but I'm trying to make an appeal, trying to reach out and say, hey, this is what we're doing over here. It might be of interest to somebody else. Unfortunately, a lot of that concerns some of the most activist research we have around. One that intrigues me, I've just been in Graz talking about translation history, and we had people working on epistemicide, that we are killing off whole knowledge systems. Okay, and it's very close to me in Australia, at the University of Melbourne. We are working to integrate indigenous ecologies of knowledge. Seriously, it's very hard to do, and there's lots of opposition to it. Okay, but the claim that we have killed off whole systems of knowledge is very empty unless you can point to those systems of knowledge and say, that is what was killed off, and that's what we need. But then our fellow researchers come out and say, well, obviously they were killed off, so we don't know what they are, but we think they were there. And you can't test it. It becomes untestable. In the Australian context, it's very testable. What happens? You get a huge bushfire. Okay, 2 years ago, bushfires up and down the eastern coast. And you turn around and say, oh, we did land management wrongly. Oh, look, those Aborigines did wonderful land management by burning off all the undergrowth periodically. We didn't learn from them, did we? Okay. There are real-world examples. I've just written an article this year trying to figure out how Aboriginal cultures handled translation. And I discovered they didn't. Do you know what they did? Everybody learns 3 languages, at least. Okay, and you have these overlapping languages, and that is basically how translation problems were solved, by multilingualism or having polyglots. Other ways of thinking about problems that we may have to solve. Here's going straight to it, okay? If you have an activist strategy and you're applying it to bring about change in the world, and it fails after 20 years, you might want to look at some data on the ground and think about changing your strategy. All right? That's what I mean by activism. When there is no testing of alternative modes of translation or alternative propositions about disasters in the world around us, the danger is you become despondent and give up, or simply complain. If only academics ruled the world. God, have you seen how our universities are run by academics? Imagine if they were in power. However, I don't think there is firm evidence for generalized despondency, not in translation, not in many of the apparent iniquities that are all around us. And I urge you, please don't give up. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. Hej, počujeme sa, dobre. Thank you, Anthony, for this presentation. I guess we're going to have like 50,000 questions, and we have only like 15 or 20 minutes for questions, so who would like to start? And I will pass you the microphone.
It's not a question, it's just a comment that we are trying to avoid creating our own echo chambers as organizers by writing this sort of a call and inviting you to speak about it.
Very clever. So you knew I was going to say that. I'm disappointed. Okay.
Even before we invited you. That's why. Okay, are there any other questions, maybe?
Well done. A point to you.
Questions? Aha.
Thank you for that talk, Anthony. It's nice to see you again. I don't know if you remember me, but we did a little interview on YouTube together. And in that interview, it's Renee. And in that interview, you asked me a question, and now I'm going to throw it back to you. You asked me if empiricism and activism were mutually exclusive. I'd be curious to hear you on that topic today.
Martin just told me that they are by no means mutually exclusive. To do empirical research, you need motivation. That's the first thing you need. Anybody who's doing a doctoral thesis, these are the people I was talking with yesterday in Graz on translation history. What is your motivation? And if you haven't got that motivation, you're not going to make it through. And the motivation for many of those 17 students I worked with yesterday was to change things in the world or show things that deserve to be known, to enact a kind of historical justice or greater awareness in contemporary society. So yes, a certain kind of activism is necessary for any research if it's going to be motivated. If the motivation is to keep your supervisor happy, well, that's a different kind of action, okay? Activism without empiricism, though, is quite frankly one of the dangers that we have, one of the things I don't like in contemporary translation studies. To the extent that I tried to move out of translation studies, for a number of years I go to other conferences, or try to publish in other journals, and they don't really want me. It's very hard to move out of a discipline. You have to start relearning and everything. Yeah, I'm serious about presenting what I presented here, although it may appear flippant. I do seriously think that in many of the activist areas of translation studies, we need far more empiricism, far more interaction with data, far more reflexivity, questioning of the self. There is so much facile certitude about I know the way to help to save the world. I'll confess, I don't know, but I hope I'm trying to find out. What do you think, Renee?
I gave you my answer on YouTube. So, I mean, I would tend to agree that perhaps there are some facile assumptions, but I do think it's interesting to see where the terms activism, activist show up in peer review. I mean, I don't want to, we can talk about this offline if you would like.
No,
but
I think this is very important. What, can you explain?
Okay, well, I mean, I think when some marginalized or underrepresented groups tend to speak up and try to take that activist position, it can be shut down occasionally in peer review by people who don't necessarily have those lived experiences. I find that personally and professionally problematic.
Absolutely.
And so I agree that a certain amount of empiricism is necessary, but there's also lived experience.
Yes, but that's empiricism, lived experience.
But it doesn't always show up that way in our field in the way that peer review is conducted.
There are bastards everywhere, I know that. Yeah. Well. But if you look at the way I use empiricism, or, you know, I will talk about my own experience as a translator. I think that is empirical. It's drawing on data. It's data that I have in. I talked about me getting translating back in the day. That's also empirical.
Okay.
Okay. what is interesting is doing a search for activist translation theory and seeing what countries these people work in. Lots of authoritarian regimes are quite welcoming to activist translation theory. You have to think about it.
Thank you. Yes, we have another question. We have two questions, actually.
Well, thank you so much, Professor. I'm overwhelmed, but I'll try to spit out a question. You mentioned during your speech that when we have to conceptualize when we interact with data, but we also have to conceptualize before we interact with data. Could you elaborate a bit on that?
Yeah, my example for that was the audiovisual translator complaining about la posedición, with post-editing, when she really meant machine translation and a particular kind of machine translation and inadequate pay being given to post-editors. I mean, there are grounds to complain, but conceptually it wasn't elaborated because she didn't know about the technology, to be honest. And so many of the complaints we have about technology in general are from people outside who never take the time to work with it and see what the different types of tools are and what their capacities are. That's one very practical level of conceptualization. The other is the classical Popper stuff. Popper, talking about how we do science, just said we have to be empirical but not inductive. We need more deductive work, more work on what a good research question is, how that becomes hypotheses, what those variables are, how you operationalize the variables. All that has to be done with research. Engaging with data, it's a to and fro thing. But if you don't do any of that and just talk about technology or AI, you're not going to get any good results.
And then maybe one more question, since the name of Gensler came up at the beginning, I think, of your speech. I was just wondering, would you share your ideas on the way he is speaking about post-translation?
That sort of died, didn't it?
Has it?
I don't know.
In a postmodern paradigm, I thought that should be...
Who was talking about avoiding the P section in the library? Yes, okay. Exploring Translation Studies is a book on translation theory, and the last chapter is called Cultural Translation, but it has lots of the things that Gensler calls post-translation. Okay, so you can take the models of translation and apply it to other areas of life. You can look at a city, you can look at this and say, this is a translated military casino. And it's interesting to do that. It's interesting for the way we think about translation and the way we think about architecture and living in a city of great history, for example. And I find that fascinating to do. Is it going to... I'll cut to the chase, okay? In my own work, I nevertheless privilege languages. Firstly, I like languages. Secondly, they are incredibly powerful instruments for cultural identities. And my work in Melbourne in COVID has very much been with getting healthcare messaging into, well, we get up to 80, but there are 270 languages. You can't just pretend that, whole cultural translation will solve the problem. It's not going to solve those particular problems. So yes, I'm happy to go along with it. I do very much in that chapter on cultural translation. I say that's where the most important questions are being asked, but my own work still privileges languages because they're fun to work with, okay?
There was one question behind you, okay?
Thank you very much. It is so nice to finally see you in person after years of watching you online in lectures during the pandemic. So I have two questions. One is very naive. So you mentioned that when there is a group being privileged, it always means that there is also a group that is not being privileged. So I would really be hoping that this is not always true, but I can't find any example in my mind, to be honest. And
I think in the example that you mentioned, also some racial inequities and other things, and probably financial things play into this question. So where we can find hope that, for example, the Netflix subtitles will be available in languages that are underprivileged right now, like when you mentioned about there being Ukrainian, but not other languages of minorities that are much more present in Spain. And the other question is about what you mentioned in your teaching, that you always mention to the students that they shouldn't put any confidential data into any of those systems. So my question is, will you be changing that during your classes? And maybe one comment.
Wait, I can't remember 3.
Okay, no, the last one. Maybe the last one I'll tell you during the coffee break then.
Okay,
Yeah.
deal.
Thank you very much.
What was the first one again? Will there be hope? Hope about what?
Yeah, so the inequality, there is always like, if somebody's privileged.
Exclusion.
Yeah.
Hey, Aboriginal solution, multilingualism. The African immigrants come in with 3 languages at least and learn Spanish very quickly. I mean, immigrants are among the world's fastest language learners when they have to. So on the ground, the solution is the Aboriginal solution. First contact, interpreters, absolutely, but I'm afraid we tend to do it in French, which is Northern African lingua, it's still around, and not much else, and Arabic for some. But French tends to be the lingua franca that's used for the context situation in the south of Spain. So, I mean, practical solutions on the ground. You can't think, though, that all the world's problems are going to be solved by professional translators. Language learning is the long-term solution that immigrants do find. Question number 2 was what?
Are you going to still tell the students not to put confidential things into systems?
Yeah, I work on risk management. I say, consider the risks.
I do the same thing, so.
Okay, that's it.
Okay, and maybe we now have time for the very last question, Marketa. I think you wanted to ask something, and then we will enjoy our coffee break.
Thank you very much for this piece of blue sky in a really depressed country, as Slovakia now is, before the elections. And I think it was really tough to share with us the 3rd slide with all the things that are becoming better in the world, but the half of the list doesn't happen in Slovakia still. But my question is connected to the artificial intelligence revolution, and it's maybe not really connected to the translation studies, but I would like to hear your meaning about this. And the question arises when I was attending a conference at the Faculty of Law here at the Comenius University, where the lawyers were discussing the impact on artificial intelligence on a few of professions. And actually, they are nearly sure that the artificial intelligence will replace the human in a lot of decision processes. So I think, and I agree with you, that it is really a very important source and help to work together with the artificial intelligence, also by translation. And I was also trying to use ChatGPT and other resources and to look how they can help my students. But the lawyers say, for example, in some countries already get the artificial intelligence citizenship. That means that it can replace us in some decision processes like healthcare. Do you think that this will lead to loss of a lot of freedom for the humans?
Oh, do you remember? Anybody remember the millennium bug? You'll be pretty old for millennium bug, right? Like all the computers are going to go, and the lifts will be in the wrong place. Well, you can say a lot before the actual event happens. No, I don't share that pessimism. I think it's easy to opine before interacting with the technology.